Thanks for joining me, Tom Pitts, my good friend, former business associate from the salad days. When Kimberly was talking about doing, a little video for the folks at Thriller Fest because of this year's festivities going online, I immediately thought of you because we have a shared history, and for 15 minutes, I think we can regale the audience with Twisted Tales.
I just want to make sure it wasn't like, this is a perfect time to have Tom on because he's at a safe distance. We don't want to be in the same room.
Well, no, the idea is we're going to talk about writing for 15 minutes, and specifically what I thought you and I could talk about and bring to the table, like no one else maybe can, is how you can use real life harrowing experiences in your work. I know you draw frequently from our shared past. For those who aren't aware, Tom and I met as homeless drug addicts in the 90s, and
that was actually on the resume at the time.
And after we straightened out, we lost touch for a while. We reconnected. It turned out we were both going to be writers, and so we began publishing books. Traditionally publishing books. Tom just had a new one come out called Cold Water, which came out like 2 days ago.
2 days ago, two days ago to much
with a lovely blurb from who was it? Matthew McBride, right? Matthew McBride.
Oh yeah, Matthew McBride and Johnny Shaw.
Yeah, and Johnny Shaw, delightful, another Johnny Shaw. Anyway, haven't read Cold Water, haven't read all your stuff. You've read all my stuff. Maybe you want to talk about how you use those dark days to color your fiction and add, wait for it, 10-cent grad school word, verisimilitude to your work.
Well, I mean, there's the obvious way, that the hands-on experience with crime and all that kind of crap, and that teaches you the reality of a crime and how nothing ever really seems to work out. People are always late. There's no precision. There's no timing, and none of that is part of the game. But more than anything, I think what it teaches you is like a strange extended empathy towards really despicable people, because instead of in fiction where you're trying to empathize with the evil character and understand his motivation, out on the street you actually have to deal and contend with people that are absolute scumbags and befriend them and work side by side, so to speak. And it really teaches you a different way to look at everybody's perspective, I think. At least that's what I got a little.
No, and I think empathy has to be taught. I mean, it has to be experienced. It can't be taught. And yeah, that's exactly what you learn. Having grown up in a nice suburban enclave in Connecticut, it wasn't until I spent some time with some truly despicable people that I realized everybody is trying their best and doing their best. And some of the
or the very simple act of when I see somebody on the street. I mean, you may go through a range of emotions for everybody, from sympathy, pity, and anger, or whatever, when you see somebody out of their mind on the corner yelling at themselves. But for someone who has accidentally caught themselves, I mean, I'm not schizophrenic and I don't spend a lot of time yelling at myself, but in anger at, like the dope man wouldn't call back, or somebody wouldn't lend you $20 and you're walking down the street going, cursing. And I've been that guy, and I've had people step around me too. And that is a truly priceless bit of a life experience. I wish that show Naked and Afraid just did a, homeless in the Tenderloin in San Francisco version. Because
I remember you saying this to me. Like, that's how, because you see the people talking to themselves, and that's how it starts, because you spend so much time alone. Yeah. It's completely, you're so cut off from everything. Nobody gives a shit about you anymore. You're done. And so there is no reason not to be like, you stupid, what the, you start doing that. And I found myself doing that down the street. And then you see where that goes, because you just follow that to its logical conclusion. And then you got these people, smashing the side of their head and screaming at the sky.
And our logical conclusion, it was not that many corners around from the street where we were standing. I don't know if you remember. I don't want to bore the audience with trivial details about certain people. But you remember red-haired Fred, who used to hang out at
yeah. I was just talking about red-haired Fred the other day, because he used to do this thing where somebody would be mad at him because he was such a little guy and couldn't really fight with him, so he'd hide in a bush, right? And he'd wait till they were almost going in the door, and then he'd jump out like he was going to attack him, but it was too late.
But he He was someone that you'd walk up, you'd hear somebody having a completely psychotic episode on the street, and people like in a circle gathered watching this guy like spitting mad and raving and howling, and I peeked through the crowd and I'm like, oh, it's Fred. And more than one occasion I walked up and gone, hey, Fred, and he takes a breath in his screaming and says, oh, hey, how's it going? And then goes back to complete, insanity.
Let me ask you, practical questions, because we got such a short amount of time. But Matthew, I don't know if you know Matthew. He wrote me the other day and asked if we could talk. He's working on a new book where he has some drug addicts, and he wanted to make sure you got the stuff right. And it's nice being the go-to guy when they have to get the drug addict stuff right. But how invaluable is that? Knowing, the difference between, the way crackheads respond to things, or heroin addicts, or just people who dabble on the weekend. I mean, there's a definite. There's a hierarchy, but there's also a definite delineation of characteristics. The way certain addicts will behave, and if you mix it with this drug, they behave this way, and we know that firsthand, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that what heroin taught, the weird, ironic lessons of heroin addiction, specifically heroin, for me, were I know that water's so loud up there. Sorry. Being able to compartmentalize, which I'm kind of oddly enough unable to do now. And you learn that in a bad way. You learn, because you're doing rotten things and you forget about them, and you have a great way to separate those two things, and that's the most powerful drug in the world. But you also learn discipline. I was explaining this, weirdly enough, talking about you in an interview yesterday, talking about hepatitis heights, and like there's basically two kinds of drug addicts. There are the guys who wait for the drugs to walk through the door, and there are the guys that like say, fuck it, I don't want to be sick, I'm going to go out and get drugs. And you and I that's really why we did bond on the street, because we were the guys up before dawn, making sure we got her fixed. And that kind of discipline, let's not forget, I was homeless, but I had 2 fucking jobs because I had a habit, you know what I mean? I wasn't out there begging for change. I was fucking working to keep that fucking needle in my arm. So, that, in a weird way, I learned a lot of just hard life lessons that way. And and one other thing drug addiction taught me is that birthdays and Christmases and Thanksgivings aren't really that important. People wonder why I give less of a shit about that kind of stuff. And when you spend a few in the soup line, you kind of, the bloom is off the rose for a lot of that special stuff. So you learn to just each day, every day, sit down, do your job, and move forward. Really,
you talk about a practical application. I guess I mean more having the firsthand. Now, I was watching a show last night with my wife, Justine, The Sinner. I don't know if you've seen it. It's been around for a while. Anyway, there's a drug addict scene. There's a drug scene. You just look and you're going like, yeah, that's not really how you shoot up. That's not really what happens. That, and like they show the arms. I'm like, yeah, I'm guessing they're trying to show you the drug addict, but like that's not how arms look. That's not how track marks look. It's not just like this one burn section in the middle of your arm. It's track marks. They look like a train going up. But these are little details you get right in the riding. In Lamentation, it was all speed, and new book I'm working on, Shadow People's all speed. But then there's other books, that were more heroin. There's definitely characteristics for somebody who's on opiates, the way they behave. The joke about the heroin addict and the speed freak is the heroin addict steals from you and the speed freak steals from you and helps you look for it, which is true. And but that you make that into a characteristic, you make that into one of your characters, and that's how they behave, and it travels along, the entire narrative arc for, behavior.
Well, I think the biggest thing that I took from real life that I try to apply and try to at least make my statement, because you're right, so much fiction, television, movies, they get drug addiction wrong. And I wrote a book called Hustle, literally to try to, at least give my version of at least putting one foot down on the earth, because people get, dependent drugs, people get sick within hours. In fiction, they're always drug addicts, but they're never suffering from actual withdrawals. And speed brings psychosis. Within a very short amount of time, people forget, like they're out doing speed and it hasn't getting up the next morning. No. They didn't go to bed. It just, that kind of, it's not a huge thing, but detail, like the shooting up thing. How in movies, they're always like shooting up in this direction. Yeah. No one does that. Or the instant into the neck, when they sneak up behind you and grab a needle into your neck. Yeah.
It's not
sadly, yeah.
Sadly, we know. Yeah. I mean, that's what the Jerry Stahl job, where you're just like the drug consultant on a and it always bugged me with Breaking Bad. It's like there was that one. I mean, it's such a great show, virtually flawless. Except the one thing that bugged me is there's a scene where I think it's Jesse is doing the really pure meth and it's burning black. And it's like, no, if it's really really pure, it's gonna burn white. Like there's no residues. No, the black is just the the contaminants in it. But I mean, I'm not sure anybody notices or cares. But yeah, I mean, that stuff drives me
Yeah.
nuts.
Putting a candle under China White when it doesn't need it. They finally started making dope brown. They finally got around to that. But yeah, I mean, and I assume in otherwise, this is just sadly my area of expertise. I'm sure there's attorneys out there watching, John Grissom movies and reading John Grissom books, going, "Hey, that's not the way it works." But what the fuck do I know? Or even more so, police procedurals. I mean, I'm a baby. I can only really take from my experience with that, so it's always a very limited scope on.
No, if you're talking to anybody who writes about guns, that's the thing they always get criticized about. Like that's not the right kind of gun. They don't, Mark Greene talks about like if you get any kind of thing wrong, you get 1,000 emails and letters, people being upset. Yeah, I mean, when I did
I'm going to start sending them too. You and I should start sending them off. Hey, that's not crystal meth. That looks like sugar.
No, I mean that's why I wrote Junkie Love. The same reason you wrote Hustle was to get those to tell the story what it's really like, and that's the thing that bugs me a lot. Of the how the dealers are always the bad guys. And I'm not here defending drug dealers. I understand they're doing bad things. However, I will say some of the best friends that I had in my life, guys like Gluehead, right, were dealers, and they were my friends. Like it's not necessarily
the same situation. You're talking about kindred spirits. I mean, you have the same sort of goal. All you're doing is helping feed their habit. I mean, really,
No, let's go to, right? It's a go-to. It's a trope. Like, the same way the Nazis are always the bad guys. Well, Nazis are always the bad guys. But in Indiana Jones movies, right? Nazis are bad guys then. They're bad guys now. It's just a go-to thing. And
they're bad guys then, too.
Bad guys then, they'll be bad guys tomorrow. And no, you can always make the dealer the bad guy, right? Because he's a drug dealer. He's a bad guy. But it's not, you never attach the human element to it. That usually they're people in the same boat, right? And they have families they're trying to support. And, I mean, everybody... making it clear, like anybody on that side of the law that we were wrong. We were doing bad things. We were criminals. But to define, this criminal's okay and this criminal is kind of a victimless crime. Like we're all in the same boat. I mean, we all have suffered. Well, I suffered mild brain damage. I don't know if you did. A little bit years later. So I mean, we spent a lot of time basically abusing our bodies and minds and coming back at all and having a story to tell and telling it in any kind of coherent fashion is sort of a miracle.
True, and it's and I forget to sometimes do what we're doing now, which is to stand with a little distance and appreciate that we survived. Because if we have a lot of friends that aren't able to sit here and chat about the past
because they're dead. Yeah, they're dead. So they can't talk because they are.
And they're still fucking dying. It's not something that all happened. No, I just lost my closest friend in November, October.
Yeah, this is always the part, and we're almost done. But this is the part that always never fails to blow my mind. And I think I said this when we had the Junkie Love launch. Is that to think that we would be here now in 2020, despite the apocalypse and the world ending and all that. But you and I personally, just from a selfish point of view, that you and I starting out at Hepatitis Heights, for those who don't know, was a house riddled with hepatitis, hence the name. It was on a hill. That would be here, all these years later, traditionally published and authors, and is sort of, never fails to make me laugh and smile. And it's a good thing, right?
Well, speaking of, I drove by, not Hepatitis Heights, but I drove by, speaking of dealers, one of these, drug dealers that I had known for years and he got to, and he was a friend, whatever, doesn't matter. But the point is, I drove by this apartment realizing, this a couple of weeks ago, and realizing in the front room I had died. I had died. Someone just happened. I went into this room, went out, was flat on the floor. Someone just happened to walk into the room and like, "Hey, Tom's blue on the floor." Gave me CPR. That's something that used to happen to some people weekly, but it didn't happen to me very much. And I looked up at that room through the window and thought, man, if my life had ended like it came so close to so many years ago, that was probably like 1997 or something. And I just think about what wouldn't exist. I mean, aside from, fuck the books, my wife, my kids, my family, it's such a heartbreak. And to see that stolen from so many of my peers is equally as heartbreaking. Wow, this took a dark turn.
Well, and on that sunny note, I think we're out of time. I think that's the 15 minutes we got. But you know, highly recommend Tom Pitt's work to if you want to understand what the darker side of life is.
Weird Hustle, that'll take you all the way down the dark path. And Junkie Love too. And Junkie Love, hey, I mean,
yeah,
it's just not really fiction.
It's not really. No, we finally released it as a memoir, so it's good. It's good. Well, thanks for doing this with me, man. I appreciate it, and I hope people watching get a lot out of it. And if you have any drug questions, you can certainly find Tom and I if you want to, you know, figure out how to make sure your character is fully rounded and not a two-dimensional kind of cardboard cutout. We're easy to find.
We can answer any question, but can you cop for me?
Right.
Can you get some? I won't answer that one.
Drugs.
I'm just noticing how big my quarantine hair is. I'm sorry.
Mine's slicked back because it's a mess. It's crazy. It's pretty awful. All right. Well, thanks, man. I'm sure I'll see you one of these days again.
Yeah, down at the methadone clinic. No, just kidding.
All right.
Bye, brother.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Doc.